Hello, everybody. You're very welcome back to EnglishLogica.com's Vocabulary Building Series. My name is Ronald A. Goby, and today we're going to look at some vocabulary related to the word small. So let's get started. As usual, we're going to break down our video into two sections. The first is synonyms for small. The second will be idioms related to the word small. Let's get started with synonyms for small. We break our language or our vocabulary as usual down into two sections. The first is the common use or spoken English or everyday language. The second is the advanced exams, so more sophisticated language that you might find in exams like GRE, GMAT, LSAT, etc. So under the common use, we are looking at miniature, minute, runt, nitty-gritty, scanty, tiny or teeny, narrow, lesser, and meager. In the advanced exams, we are looking at minutia, diminutive, minuscule, paltry, and Lilliputian. And there are some more in the common use. Slight, modest, petite, cramped, undersized, trivial, pitiful, inconsiderable, and negligible. So let's get started with the common use synonyms. Our first word is miniature. This is a smaller version of a real thing. So there is a way you can use miniature as a verb to say that something was miniatured, but this is rarely heard. You won't hear people using that a lot. So think of figurines, model railways, small representatives or representations, of something larger. So our examples then, example one, the model town was full of miniatures of the people who lived there. Example two, we planted a miniature garden for the kids. We even put little models of houses in it. Example three, the detail in the sculpture was astonishing, and it was even more intricate in miniature. The next word is minute. This is something that is extremely small or of minor importance. It's important to get the pronunciation right with this one. So it's not minute, it's not about time. We generally use this word, the word minute, when talking about details or components that might be otherwise overlooked. So our examples, we need to look at every minute detail in this report. The survival of the business depends on it. Example two, I don't think the differences are minute. In fact, I think they're quite significant. Our next word is runt. This is the smallest among a group. Now, this word is usually used as an insult, so do be careful how you use it. It relates to the smallest baby animal born amongst its siblings, but you can use it as an insult to someone small. So example one, the boy was so small and skinny that the bullies called him a runt. Example two, the dog had been abandoned because it was the runt of the litter, but it grew to normal size pretty quickly. Our next word is nitty-gritty. This is the small, specific, and essential details. So the nitty-gritty are the little details or components that are essential and integral to the workings or operations of a project or machine, for example. So our examples then, okay, everyone, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Number two, do we really need to get into the nitty-gritty of what happened? It's over now. Let's not dwell on it. Our next word is scant and scanty. This is something that's barely enough or adequate. There's usually no article before scant, whereas with scanty, there is. So you can say there's scant amount of something, or there's a scanty amount. So it's best to follow scanty with the noun of the thing you're talking about, because you don't really need the word amount when you say scanty. So in example one, there is scant difference between scant and scanty. They almost mean the same thing. Example two, there was a scanty amount of food delivered to the hotel. The staff just hoped their guests wouldn't eat much. Example three, she was very scantily dressed, which some of the men found distracting. Our next word is tiny or teeny. This is something that is very small. We're using these words together or cover them together because they're very similar. You might hold something tiny in your hand. Teeny is a less formal version of tiny, but you can also hear people saying a teeny tiny thing. So example 1, I only made a tiny mistake. It didn't really matter. Example 2, don't give me too much dinner today. I ate a meal earlier, so just a tiny amount will do. Example 3, oh, look at that little puppy. He's so teeny he could fit in my pocket. Example 4, it was just a teeny error, but it was significant in the long run. The next word is narrow and narrowly. This is something that is small in width or limited in extent. And when we say small in width, it's in relation to length. So you're talking about passageways or roads or paths, things like that. So you can use it as a verb. You can talk about narrowing the gap or to narrow the gap. Picture the road narrowing up ahead or walking down a narrow laneway between two houses. Example 1, they won the competition by a narrow margin. It was a close call. Example 2, as the race drew to a close, the gap narrowed between the fastest horses. Example 3, we only narrowly avoided losing everything. The next word is lesser. This is something that is not as important or not as great or large as something else. And when you're talking about things that are not as large or as important as another, you don't say they are more or less than. You say that they are lesser than, or something is lesser than, or is a lesser amount of something. So example 1, I opted for a lesser amount when I couldn't get any more. Example 2, look at that guy. He's so full of himself. He thinks of us all as lesser mortals. And that's a popular expression, lesser mortals. Our next word is meager. This is a small amount or degree of something. This can be used in relation to quantity or quality. So it can be not enough of something or something that is not good enough. The American spelling, meager with an ER, and meagerly, ERLY. The pronunciation is exactly the same. So example 1, he had to work 2 jobs to boost his meager income. Example 2, it's unfortunate that women are so meagerly represented in the disciplines of science. Our next word is slight or slightly. This is a small amount or degree. You might know this as an adverb and adjective, but slight can also be both a verb and a noun. So you can say that he slighted her and that it was a slight she could not forgive. Okay, that's in terms of an insult or inflicting an insult on someone. So example 1, there was a slight increase in profits last year. Example 2, at only 4 feet in height and very thin, she was a slight girl for her age. Example 3, they were slightly distracted, so they didn't perform well during their exam. Our next word is modest and modestly. And this is moderate or limited in terms of amount. Now, if a person is modest, this means that they don't brag about things or they're quiet about their achievements. So they don't go large, you might say. They keep things small. For our purposes, modest is about limits or keeping things moderate or balanced. So example 1, it was a modest dwelling, but it had everything they needed to live happily. Example 2, our profits have been increasing modestly in recent years. We haven't made a fortune, but we're heading in the right direction. Our next word then is petite. This is small and thin. It's always used in relation to women. You won't hear people talking about a man as being petite. It refers to women who remain small and thin in stature throughout their lives. If a woman needs to buy clothes in the kids section, she's petite, or there might be a section called the petite section. So example 1, the girl was slim and petite. Example 2, my daughter needs to buy dresses in the petite section because she's so small. Our next word is cramped. This is restricted or tight in terms of space. You might have heard the expression, "you're cramping my style." This means that you're restricting someone from expressing themselves or you're holding them back. If someone says, "I have very bad cramps," this means that there's a tightness in their stomach, usually related to constipation or buildup of gas. So it's that idea of tightness and restriction. So example 1, the family were forced to live in cramped conditions. Example 2, the rooms were so small in the hotel that the guests were cramped together uncomfortably. The next word is undersized. This is something that is less than normal size. If something is smaller than you expect it to be, you can describe it as undersized. So this is about your expectations. You might think of a premature baby as undersized, or even a cake that didn't rise properly in the oven. It would be an undersized cake. So example 1, the crossbreeding produced a litter of undersized pups, which would need a lot of care to survive. Example 2, everyone was taken off the airplane and forced into an undersized room without proper ventilation. Our next word is trivial. This is of very low importance. If something is trivial, it's not considered important, or it's considered less important than something else. Remember that you can trivialize something in this matter. So if you trivialize something, that means you present it as being less important, or you don't give it the respect it deserves. So example 1, I'm sick of listening to you complain. Your problems are trivial compared to mine. Example 2, he was always going on about some trivial amount of money I owed him since we were kids. Our next word is pitiful. This is very small or insufficient. So if someone's actions are considered pitiful, they're not just small in size, but also in terms of their effect or the outcome of those actions. So a pitiful person might be considered weak, but pitiful just means that it wasn't enough. So example 1, there was a pitiful amount of money left in the company account, so they couldn't pay any of their bills. Example 2, I can't believe you did that in a pitiful attempt to get me back. You're pathetic. Our next word is inconsiderable. This is something that is not worth considering or dwelling on. If there's no point making a fuss about something or pointing out the differences between things, you can say they are inconsiderable, not worth considering or wasting your time on. So example 1, it was not an inconsiderable amount at all. It was quite a lot. Example 2, the difference between the two houses was inconsiderable. They looked almost exactly the same. Our next word is negligible. This is something that is so small it's not worth considering. It's very similar to inconsiderable, and so it's easy to remember. A woman's sexy nightgown that's almost transparent is known as a negligee. Negligee. So that connection to negligible. So you know there's not much there. So example 1, the loss in profits was negligible. We hardly noticed it. Example 2, I've been looking at the figures for this loan application and I've concluded that the risks are negligible. Okay, so now we move on to our advanced exams synonyms. So a bit more sophisticated language, just a few words to cover here. The first is minutiae. These are the tiny details. So the clue is in the pronunciation. It has the word minute in it. It's like the word minute, but rather than having to say the minute details, you can just say the minutiae, and that implies the minute details. So example 1, we need to focus on the minutiae. Example 2, I've no interest in the minutiae. Just give me a general overview. Our next word is diminutive. This is something that is unusually or extremely small. If something is described as diminutive, it's smaller than expected. It can be something that is representative of something larger, like a model, or something that has been reduced in size. Example 1, he was a man of diminutive stature, but he had a reputation that made him seem bigger. Example 2, The model railway had little trains and diminutive buildings for them to travel around. The next word is minuscule. This is something that is extremely small or tiny. So imagine a tiny or perhaps microscopic piece of something, maybe a rock or something like that. This is a minuscule fragment or element. It might be best to think of something minuscule in terms of the larger thing it belongs to. So minuscule is more about the larger thing. It's a component of something larger. The scientists were delighted to discover even a minuscule fragment of meteorite in the barren landscape. Example 2, I don't care about the pennies and cents in the calculations. Those amounts are minuscule compared to the millions of pounds and dollars. Our next word is paltry. This is something very small or a trivial amount. This is something used to describe something. This is sometimes used to describe something that seems unfair or less than expected. It's maybe something petty or trivial as if it doesn't have much significance. So it's about an amount of something. The family were so poor that they only had a paltry serving of food. Example 2, there wasn't much food left after the dinner party, so supper was a paltry offering. Our next word and our last word in the advanced exam section is Lilliputian. Lilliputian. This is something trivial or very small. Now it's a literary term, it's quite old, it's somewhat archaic, and it's usually a derogatory term, so it is an insult. Again, be careful how you use it. It comes from the story Gulliver's Travels, where Gulliver goes to Lilliput, a country that's populated by tiny people. Example 1, he was almost Lilliputian in stature, at only 3 feet tall. Example 2, I hope I get taller when I'm older. I don't want to be Lilliputian all my life. Okay, so that's the end of our synonyms for small. And as usual, we have this table at the end, our degrees. When you move, or as you move from left to right, things might get more intense in terms of how small they are. So the intensity or the level of smallness, we'll say, gets more increased. So along the top, you have the common words or the spoken English that we looked at, and at the bottom is the vocabulary for the advanced exams. So on the top left there, we have, say, undersized or petite. But as you move towards the right and as you get all the way over to the right, you see something is minute or inconsiderable or negligible. So these are much more intense expressions of small. And the same at the bottom then of the advanced exams. Diminutive is something that is a little smaller, but minuscule or the minutia is something extremely small. Now we just move on to our idioms for small. These are idioms just have the word small in them or are related to being small. So don't sweat the small stuff. Big fish in a small pond. The small hours. Engage in small talk. Good things come in small packages. In no small measure. Make someone feel small. Read the small print. Play a small part or role. And small arms. Let's look at an example for each one of these. So don't sweat the small stuff. You have a lot of work to do, but I'd like you to focus on the main aspects of the project. Don't sweat the small stuff. We can come back to the minor details later. So this don't sweat the small stuff is telling someone not to get anxious or wound up about little details that don't really matter. A big fish in a small pond. So this is really about maybe a person who feels that they are very, very important or much more significant within the small environment in which they operate or in which they live until they're exposed to a larger world and then they realize that they were never that important. When we were growing up, he acted like a big fish in a small pond, but now that we're adults, he hasn't really amounted to much. So the small hours, these are just the early hours of the morning. I was having a great sleep until the alarm in the house across the street went off. It kept going right into the small hours, so I couldn't get back asleep. Engage in small talk. A small talk is just, you may have heard people talking about small talk. It's just unnecessary conversation or something that doesn't amount to much really when you're just chatting with someone. Small talk might be about the weather or the clothes they're wearing, or did you hear the news, or did you watch the TV? Small talk doesn't have a lot of significance. So it's hard sometimes to strike up a conversation with people you don't know. Most people end up just engaging in small talk until they find something they're both interested in. Okay, so they're just chatting away, saying nothing of any real significance. Good things come in small packages. So this is something that it's supposed to be an encouraging phrase to tell small people or people who maybe don't have a lot, that they have a lot more to offer and there's a lot more potential. So he had always been sensitive about his height, but his mother assured him that it didn't matter. She told him that good things came in small packages and that people would realize that when they met him. So in no small measure. And this is a way of saying that something that's done is not as insignificant as you might think, or that it is more significant. So we were delighted with the new equipment, the quality of which contributed in no small measure to the success of the operation. So it's saying that the equipment contributed in a significant way. So in no small measure, but in a big measure. So make someone feel small. So feel small is just this idea that if you're insulted or shouted at or something, you might almost shrink and don't feel very confident about yourself. So when you feel small, you lose your self-esteem. Please don't shout at her when she makes mistakes. You'll only make her feel small and she'll lose her confidence. So read the small print. So if any of you have ever looked at a contract or any sort of document where afterwards you'll see all this tiny print at the end, or maybe some footnotes or endnotes, that's the small print, and that's where the real details and the real nitty-gritty come out. Some people might say the devil is in the details, and that's where you'll find it, in the small print. So don't just agree to that contract without reading the small print. Companies like those often trap you with those details, and you end up owing them a fortune. But play a small part or role. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if you're playing a small part or a small role in something, it's not very significant. It's just more like support staff. You're just sort of keeping things going. There was no need to give so much credit to the upgrade to the software. It really only played a small role in the outcome. So it wasn't very significant. Small arms. So small arms, in terms of, if you've heard the expression, an arms dealer, it's someone who just sells weapons and guns. So small arms are pistols and small hand weapons. The police seized a truckload of weaponry at the port. Alongside rocket launchers and grenades and other heavy artillery, there were boxes of small arms and ammunition. Okay, so that's all our vocabulary related to the word small. Of course, there are a lot more synonyms and expressions and phrasal verbs and idioms, but this is plenty to get you started. So we hope you enjoyed this video, and we will catch you again soon on our next video. If you have any comments or anything else that you'd like to cover, anything you'd like to ask us, please drop your comments in the box below the video. Thank you very much. Take care.